Imagine waking up every morning knowing that today could easily be your last. Not because of war, not because of disease, but because everything around you wanted to kill you.
The forests echoed with the roars of giant predators. Saber-toothed cats silently stalked through tall grass. Packs of massive hyenas hunted together with terrifying precision. Venomous snakes hid beneath rocks, while insects carried diseases no human understood. And when the sun disappeared below the horizon, darkness transformed the world into an endless hunting ground. There were no homes, no walls, no weapons made of metal, no hospitals, no cities, no electricity, only fear and survival. Around 2 million years ago, early humans, such as Homo erectus, lived in a world completely controlled by nature. Every single meal had to be found. Every drop of water had to be discovered. Every night had to be survived. Their bodies were stronger than ours in many ways, but compared to the animals around them, humans were incredibly weak. They couldn't outrun a cheetah. They couldn't overpower a lion. They didn't have sharp claws like bears. They didn't have thick fur to survive freezing winters. They didn't have poisonous venom or powerful jaws. On paper, humans should never have become Earth's dominant species.
In fact, if you had looked at our ancestors back then, you probably would have bet on them going extinct. And yet, against every odd imaginable, they survived. Not because they became stronger, but because they discovered something that no other animal had ever truly mastered: fire. Ironically, humans didn't invent fire. Fire had existed for hundreds of millions of years before humans ever appeared.
Long before dinosaurs disappeared, long before mammals ruled the earth, lightning storms regularly struck dry forests. Volcanoes erupted with rivers of molten lava. Falling meteors ignited entire landscapes. Nature had been creating fire since the planet itself was young. But every time flames appeared, animals reacted exactly the same way. They ran. Birds escaped into the sky. Deer fled across open plains. Predators abandoned their hunts. Even the most powerful animals on Earth feared fire, and for good reason. Fire was unlike anything else in nature. It moved without warning. It destroyed everything in its path. It consumed entire forests within hours. It filled the air with choking smoke. It produced unbearable heat. To every living creature, fire looked like a living monster. Our ancestors were no different. The first humans almost certainly feared fire just as much as every other animal. Imagine standing hundreds of meters away as lightning crashes into a giant tree. A deafening explosion echoes across the valley. The tree bursts into brilliant orange flames.
Heat radiates through the air. Animals sprint in every direction. Smoke climbs thousands of feet into the sky. The entire forest suddenly sounds different. No birds, no insects, no predators, only crackling wood and silence. But something extraordinary happened. At some point in human history, curiosity became stronger than fear. Instead of simply running away, someone stayed behind. We don't know who they were. We don't know their name. We don't know if they were male or female. We don't even know exactly when it happened. But somewhere in Africa, perhaps nearly 2 million years ago, one small group of humans did something no other animal had ever dared. They approached the fire after the flames had weakened. The forest was silent. Black ash covered the ground. Burned trees still smoked. The air smelled strange. Everything looked different. Then they noticed something remarkable. Animals lay dead across the landscape. Some had been trapped by the wildfire. Others had suffocated in the smoke. And unlike fresh meat that quickly spoiled, these animals smelled
different. Their flesh had softened. Their fat had melted.
Without realizing it, those early humans may have just encountered the world's very first cooked meal. No recipes, no kitchens, no chefs, just nature accidentally preparing food. The first bite must have been astonishing. Cooked meat was softer, warmer, easier to chew, easier to digest. It released more calories than raw meat while requiring far less energy to eat. That single accidental discovery may have quietly started one of the greatest revolutions in human evolution. But there was one enormous problem. The fire was dying. Wildfires didn't last forever. Rain extinguished them. Strong winds scattered them. Eventually, every flame disappeared, and when it did, the darkness returned. If humans wanted the incredible benefits of fire, they needed to solve an impossible problem, not how to create it. They weren't ready for that yet. First, they had to figure out something far more difficult. How do you stop a wildfire from disappearing forever? That question would challenge humanity for hundreds of thousands of years. And the answer would change the destiny of our species forever. For thousands of generations, humans lived at the mercy of nature. If lightning started a wildfire, they had fire. If it rained, they lost it. Fire wasn't something they owned. It was something they borrowed. And borrowing from nature came with a terrifying problem. A burning branch could stay alive for only a few hours. A fallen tree might burn for a day. After that, everything went dark again. Imagine finally discovering something that keeps predators away, cooks your food, warms your family through freezing nights, only to watch it slowly die in front of your eyes. The glowing orange embers faded to red. The red faded to black. And with the last spark, your greatest weapon disappeared. Early humans quickly realized that finding fire wasn't enough. They had to keep it alive. This may sound simple today, but keeping a fire burning without matches, lighters, or knowledge of chemistry was one of the hardest challenges our ancestors ever faced. Instead of creating new fires, they learned something even more valuable. They became caretakers of fire. When a wildfire finally died down, they would carefully collect burning branches, glowing embers, or thick pieces of hardwood that continued smoldering for hours. These weren't ordinary sticks anymore. They were priceless. Some archaeologists believe groups may have carried slow-burning logs during migration, protecting the glowing embers beneath layers of ash to prevent them from going out. Ash works like a natural blanket. It traps heat while slowing combustion. Even today, campers use this technique to keep fires alive overnight. Without understanding the science, our ancestors may have discovered this through trial and error hundreds of thousands of years ago. One mistake, one heavy rain, one forgotten ember, and months of survival knowledge could vanish overnight. That's why fire probably became the responsibility of the entire group. Someone always had to watch it. Someone always had to feed it. Someone always had to protect it. The world's first job may not have been hunter or gatherer. It may have been firekeeper. Archaeological discoveries suggest this wasn't just imagination. One of the strongest pieces of evidence comes from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Deep inside the cave, nearly 30 meters from the entrance, scientists discovered tiny fragments of burned bones and plant ash dating back almost 1.8 million years. This discovery shocked researchers. Why? Because wildfires don't naturally burn deep inside caves. The only reasonable explanation is that early humans carried fire into the cave themselves. That means these ancient people weren't simply watching wildfires anymore. They were transporting fire, protecting it, using it. Imagine how extraordinary that moment was. For the first time in Earth's history, a species had taken one of nature's most destructive forces and brought it home. Everything changed. Night was no longer completely dark. Cold winters became easier to survive. Dangerous predators became less willing to approach. Experiments with modern lions show they naturally avoid open flames. For our ancestors, a small campfire wasn't just warmth. It was a protective wall made of light. The fire also changed human behavior in unexpected ways. Before fire, once darkness arrived, there was very little to do. People rested, slept, waited for sunrise. But fire extended the day. Families could remain awake for hours after sunset. They talked, shared food, made stone tools, taught children.
Observed one another. Some anthropologists even believe language itself may have become more sophisticated because people spent evenings gathered around campfires, telling stories and passing knowledge from one generation to the next. For the first time, humans had time. Time to think, time to remember, time to imagine. The campfire may have become humanity's very first classroom.
But perhaps the greatest transformation wasn't social. It was biological. Cooking changed everything. Raw meat is surprisingly difficult to digest. It requires powerful jaws, large teeth, and enormous amounts of energy just to chew. Cooking breaks down muscle fibers before food even enters the mouth. It kills many dangerous bacteria and parasites. It softens roots and tubers that would otherwise be nearly impossible to eat. Most importantly, cooked food provides significantly more usable energy than raw food. That extra energy had somewhere to go. Instead of fueling massive digestive systems, it began fueling something far more expensive: the human brain. Although scientists still debate exactly how much cooking contributed to brain growth, there's little doubt that controlling fire dramatically improved nutrition.
Better nutrition meant healthier children, longer lives, greater survival. Generation after generation, humans became increasingly dependent on the flames they once feared. But despite all these incredible achievements, there was still one enormous limitation. Humans could keep fire alive. They could carry it. They could protect it. But if every ember went cold, they were helpless once again. They still didn't know the greatest secret of all: how to create fire from absolutely nothing. And discovering that secret would require another revolution, one that would finally free humanity from nature's control forever. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had mastered one incredible skill. They could protect fire. They could carry it across forests. They could keep it alive for weeks, sometimes even months. But they still depended on nature to create it. If the last ember died, everything was lost.
Imagine waking up after a violent rainstorm. You rush toward yesterday's campfire. The ashes are cold. The smoke is gone. You dig desperately through the black dust. Nothing. No glowing ember. No heat. No flame. Your greatest weapon has vanished overnight.
Now imagine waiting. Not for hours, not for days, but perhaps months, until lightning struck another tree. That was the reality of early humans. Fire was precious because it was incredibly difficult to replace. Some archaeologists believe entire groups may have traveled long distances simply to obtain burning wood from neighboring communities. In many traditional societies that survived into recent history, people treated fire almost like a living family member. It was never allowed to die. That tradition may stretch back hundreds of thousands of years. But eventually, human curiosity asked a dangerous question. What if we didn't have to wait for lightning anymore? What if we could make fire ourselves?
No one knows who discovered it first. There are no names, no written records, no monuments. Only clues buried beneath ancient soil.
Scientists believe the earliest reliable evidence for deliberate fire-making appears around 400,000 years ago. At archaeological sites across Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, researchers have discovered specially shaped flintstones, iron-rich minerals such as pyrite, and repeated traces of controlled fires. In 2025, researchers published evidence suggesting that early humans intentionally struck flint against pyrite, creating tiny sparks capable of igniting dry plant fibers. It sounds simple today, but imagine discovering that by accident. Two stones collide. A tiny flash appears. Barely visible, gone in an instant. Most people would ignore it. Someone didn't. Someone noticed that tiny spark. Someone wondered if it could become something bigger. That single observation changed history forever. Fire could now be created anywhere, at any time. But striking sparks wasn't the only method. Another technique slowly spread across ancient cultures. Friction. Take two pieces of dry wood. Place one against the other. Rub. Again. And again. And again. Your hands begin to blister. Your muscles ache. Nothing happens. Most people would quit. But if you continue, minute after minute, the wood begins producing fine brown dust. The temperature rises. The dust darkens. A faint wisp of smoke appears. Then, almost magically, a tiny glowing ember is born. Not a flame, just a fragile red dot, barely alive. That ember must be carefully transferred into dry grass, shredded bark, or soft plant fibers. One gentle breath. Then another. Too hard, and it dies. Too soft, and nothing happens. Suddenly, orange flames burst into life. For the first time in history, humans had created fire from nothing more than wood, stone, air, and patience. It was one of the greatest technological breakthroughs our species would ever achieve. Fire was no longer a gift from nature. It had become human technology. And once that happened, everything accelerated. People no longer needed to live near naturally occurring wildfires. Communities could settle almost anywhere. Cold mountains, open grasslands, dense forests, even regions that had once been impossible to survive. Fire transformed geography itself. But perhaps its greatest gift wasn't warmth. It was time. Before fire, much of every day was spent chewing. That might sound strange today, but scientists estimate early humans spent several hours each day simply eating raw food. Raw roots, raw meat, tough plants. Everything required enormous effort. Cooking changed all of that. Meals became softer, digestion became easier, more calories became available with less effort. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham argues that cooking was one of the key forces that allowed the human brain to grow so dramatically. The brain is an incredibly expensive organ. Although it makes up only about 2% of the body's weight, it consumes roughly 20% of the body's energy. Without a richer food supply, such a brain would have been impossible. Fire didn't just cook food. It may have helped build the very organ reading these words today. And while humans were becoming smarter, they were also becoming inventors. Once you understand that heat changes materials, an entirely new world opens. Wood becomes harder.
Factories, electricity, modern civilization itself. Every technological revolution in human history can trace its ancestry back to one simple discovery: that heat can transform matter. Looking back, it's astonishing. The first person who struck two stones together probably wasn't trying to build skyscrapers. They weren't dreaming about rockets or computers or satellites orbiting Earth. They simply wanted warmth, a safe night, a cooked meal. Yet that tiny spark would eventually illuminate every city on the planet. But even after mastering fire, humanity's journey was only beginning. Because the greatest impact of fire wasn't just survival, it completely rewrote the future of our species. And that future would eventually lead to us. Imagine, for a moment, that our ancestors had never learned to create fire. No campfires, no cooked food, no warm shelters, no protection from freezing winters, no metal tools, no engines, no electricity, no modern cities. In many ways, the world we know today would simply not exist. It's difficult to think of any human invention that changed history more than fire. Long before the wheel, long before writing, long before agriculture, there was fire. And almost every major breakthrough that followed depended on it. As humans mastered fire, they slowly stopped adapting to nature and started reshaping nature itself. Dense forests could be cleared for hunting. Grasslands could be burned to attract fresh plants and grazing animals. Archaeologists call this landscape burning, and evidence suggests that early humans deliberately used controlled fires to manage their environment thousands of years before farming even existed. For the first time, humans weren't simply surviving in nature, they were changing it. Fire also made long-distance migration possible. Around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, modern humans began spreading out of Africa into colder regions of Europe and Asia. Many of these places experienced harsh winters, where temperatures dropped well below freezing. Without fire, survival would have been nearly impossible. It provided warmth. It dried wet clothing. It melted snow into drinking water. It hardened wooden spear tips. It allowed families to sleep through icy nights that would otherwise have been fatal. In many ways, fire became humanity's first life support system. But perhaps its greatest contribution wasn't physical. It was social. Imagine an evening nearly 100,000 years ago. The hunt is over. The sun has disappeared. Beyond the edge of the camp, complete darkness hides predators waiting for an opportunity. But inside the circle of light, everything feels different. Children sit beside their parents. Food cooks slowly over glowing embers. The elderly share stories of dangerous hunts and distant lands. Young hunters listen carefully, learning lessons that could one day save their lives. The fire doesn't just provide warmth. It creates a place where knowledge can survive. Anthropologists believe these nightly gatherings may have played a major role in developing language, culture, teaching, and cooperation. Unlike any other animal, humans could now pass information from one generation to the next, not only through observation, but through stories.
One person's experience became everyone's knowledge. One mistake no longer needed to be repeated. The campfire became humanity's first classroom, its first library, its first theater, its first place of community. And those simple conversations slowly built something far more powerful than fire itself: civilization. Thousands of years later, humans discovered that fire could do far more than cook food. They realized that intense heat could transform stone into pottery, clay into bricks, sand into glass. Then came copper, bronze, iron, steel. Every great civilization, from ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia to Greece, Rome, China, and beyond, was built upon technologies that required controlled fire. Blacksmiths forged swords and farming tools. Potters created vessels for storing food and water. Builders fired bricks that became the foundations of cities. Centuries later, fire-powered steam engines during the Industrial Revolution. Those engines transformed factories, transportation, and global trade. Eventually, humanity learned to generate electricity using heat. Coal-fired power plants, gas turbines, even nuclear reactors all rely on the same basic principle: using heat to produce energy. The spark that once frightened our ancestors now powers billions of homes around the world. Think about that. Every time you switch on a light, drive a car, cook dinner, or watch a movie, you're benefiting from a discovery made by people who had no idea what electricity, engines, or computers even were. One tiny flame started an unbroken chain of innovation stretching across hundreds of thousands of years. And perhaps that's the most incredible part of this story. Fire didn't make humans intelligent. It gave intelligence the opportunity to grow. It gave people more energy, more time, safer nights, stronger communities, and eventually, the ability to imagine impossible futures. Scientists often describe humans as the species that mastered fire. But maybe that's only half the story. Because in many ways, fire also mastered us. It shaped where we lived, what we ate, how our bodies evolved, how our societies formed, and ultimately, who we became. The next time you sit beside a campfire, light a candle, or simply press a button to boil water, remember this: you're participating in a tradition that began nearly 2 million years ago, when one curious ancestor stopped running from the flames and decided to understand them instead. That single act of curiosity didn't just change one life. It changed the future of every human being who would ever live. Because the greatest invention in history wasn't the wheel or the computer or even electricity. It was the moment humanity learned to turn a wild force of nature into its greatest ally. And from that first tiny spark, an entire civilization was born.